standpoint, landscape damage has occurred in northeast Arkansas in 17 and 18 to sensitive trees and non-crop plants. And I also want to take you back to the EPA. The EPA, when they registered Dicamba just a month ago, in that registration decision, here's what they stated. We really don't know the impact, the ecological impact on these perennial species, on these trees. And for that reason, we're going to require, because of the uncertainty, we're going to require the registrants to go conduct research over the next 2 years to try to understand the environmental impact, because we don't know that at this point. Now I want to talk about some past experiences here with the plant board in the state of Arkansas. Is this the first time that Arkansas has dealt with a volatile herbicide? No, it's not. Actually, there was a product called clomazone, or Command, or is a product, that was formulated as an EC, and FMC corrected their volatility problem before actually trying to launch it in rice. And today it is commercially available as a microencapsulated formulation. They addressed their volatility issue, and today we use clomazone on 95% of the Arkansas rice acres. Now here's my question. Did the board address that, or did the company address that? The company got it right. The company understood there was no way that they could put that product in the marketplace here in the state of Arkansas until they had a commercially acceptable formulation that would stay where it was being sprayed. And I will tell you today, looking at the numbers, do we have a volatility issue today with Command? No, we don't. Are there some off-target incidences in the state of Arkansas? Yeah, we have a few. There's a couple every year. But do we have 1,000 complaints? Do we have 100 complaints? Do we have 50 complaints with Command? No, absolutely we do not. Now I'll also tell you today, and this comes back to Dicamba, this is not something that I as a weed scientist can fix. I've said that time and time again. This is a formulation problem. This is not something the Arkansas State Plant Board can fix. This is not something the Division of Agriculture can fix. This is something that can only be fixed by the registrar. I want to quickly show you quinclorac on rice. In the state, we have a ½ mile by ground buffer upwind and a 1 mile by ground buffer downwind to incorporated towns for solanaceae crops, things like tomato. Folks, this is a non-volatile product, and we got a 1 mile buffer on a non-volatile product. And oh, by the way, what has the Arkansas State Plant Board done in the past? There's actually today, there's a ban. It's banned in some areas of northeast Arkansas. Poinsett, Craighead, there's bans there. Areas for which it cannot be used. Now I want to look at 2,4-D. I'll tell you today, 2,4-D, and we've got a wealth of research will support this. The off-target movement of 2,4-D is physical drift. I've actually shown you some of that data. In 2006, there was a major incident in the state in which, I'll tell you, there was some 2,4-D that got sprayed and loaded into an inversion from airplanes. Dr. Ford Baldwin is with us today, and he was kind enough to share this photo with me yesterday. I called him and asked him did he have a photo. This is a Bradford pear. This stuff moved 30 miles. And I had an opportunity, I had just come to work with the University of Arkansas, I had an opportunity to walk and take a look at this. Folks, this isn't a volatility issue. When I look at this Bradford pear, and I go around and look at the other side of that Bradford pear, I don't see the damage on the other side. Because it's a physical drift. I can track physical drift. I cannot track. Volatility is very challenging to track, especially when we load the air with a volatile product. Today, Mississippi, Crittenden County, we have 4 miles to susceptible crops. You can apply for a permit. Why can you put a permit out? Because there's traceability. It's a physical issue. It's not a volatility issue. It's physical movement that we can trace for 2,4-D. The remainder of the state today has a 4 mile buffer by air and a 1 mile buffer by ground. 1 mile buffer for this product that's moving downwind, physical movement. Now I've got a couple of you that in this room that know something about cotton. Those of you that know something about cotton, I think you would all agree that 2,4-D and cotton struggle to mix. Okay, I mean, that's putting it mildly. Okay? That's not something that we like to get around each other. And the reason I state that is because cotton farmers understand that. But what about soybean farmers in Dicamba? Actually, this is a summary from Bob Hartzler at Iowa State University, where he looked at some literature looking at the lowest observed dose causing significant visual crop response. And this is based on the literature. And what he concluded was soybeans is 4 times more sensitive to Dicamba as cotton is to 2,4-D. Do what? You're telling me that soybean is more sensitive to Dicamba than cotton is to 2,4-D. That's what the literature says. That's what Bob Hartzler concluded. Oh, by the way, we've got more of a volatility issue with Dicamba, and I've done direct comparisons, Dicamba versus 2,4-D. More of a volatility issue here, including the newer formulations versus 2,4-D. Now I want to summarize with you some research, and this is hot off the press. This was published about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it's from Andrew Kniss. It's called The Soybean Response to Dicamba, Meta-Analysis. And he went in and took all the literature on Dicamba and soybean, and he summarized it all, he looked at it all, he did an analysis on it, and what he concludes is that 5% injuries caused by 1 over, let's say, a 15,000th X rate. Does anyone in this room really know what a 15,000th X rate is? Folks, I'll tell you, it's a very, very, very low dose. It's basically just taking a small drop and putting a small drop here on this table and then spreading that small drop of spray over 1 acre. I mean, that's what we're talking about. And he says that's caused 5% injury. He also says, and I thought this was of significance, no one has ever published a dose of Dicamba for which symptoms are not induced in soybean. No one. He said he went and looked at every paper published and could not find a bottom dose that did not induce symptoms in soybean. Now I want to quickly come to your proposed Dicamba regulation. And the proposed regulations state on May 20th through June 15th a 1/4 mile buffer in all directions for non-tolerant Dicamba crops, sensitive crops, and areas as defined by the product label. First thing I'll note is all sensitive crops are non-tolerant to Dicamba. Okay? Let's note that. But this 1/4 mile buffer, we're talking about mile buffers on products that did not have a volatility issue. We're now talking a 1/4 mile buffer on products that have volatility associated with them. Question for the board. What's your goal today? What is the goal with this buffer? And I'm not here to answer that. I mean, that's your question to answer. How do you come to a 1/4 mile buffer on a volatile product and a 1 mile buffer on a product such as 2,4-D that poses physical drift? What's meant by sensitive area? You know, I found it interesting when I looked back up here, and you know, I highlight the word, the product label. I went and looked at these labels, and the good thing about PDFs today, you can do a word search. Does anyone know that Ingenia actually defines what a sensitive area is so you can refer to the product label? Does anyone realize that the word sensitive area does not even appear in the Extendamax label? It's not in here. So I'll tell you this today. If you pass this right here, Ingenia is going to apply to sensitive areas, and Extendamax doesn't even have the word sensitive area in it. Now, how does BASF go about defining a sensitive area? What they define a sensitive area as says residential areas, bodies of water, known habitat or threatened or endangered species. And my response to this is the EPA will actually tell you counties where endangered species exist. And basically, if it's something that can't be mowed, if you can't run a mower over it, it's an environment in which an endangered species potentially could exist if it's in that county. And it says sensitive crop plants. So I'm going to come back here and ask also, was the 1/4 mile downwind buffer that in 2017, was that large enough? And you can say, well, you know, that was only one direction. We had 100 feet in the other direction. But was that large enough? Was that large enough to prevent atmospheric loading of Dicamba? And then you've got a 1 mile buffer here for the research stations, organics, commercially grown specialty crops. Is a 1 mile buffer sufficient when you've got atmospheric loading of a volatile herbicide? Is a June 15 cutoff, this right here, is that based on examination of when complaints occurred in 17 and 18? Because you have a wealth of data associated with 17 and 18 in terms of complaints. And I'm actually going to go and I'm going to answer both of those. Now, how far will dicamba move? First of all, I'll tell you, it depends on whether you put it out of an airplane, whether you put it out of a ground rig. It depends on how the wind speed. But in 2012, I had an opportunity to go over to, I do a lot of work in Marianna, and I was coming out of Marianna on Highway 79, and I was called and asked to stop right here as I came out Marianna. And I drove from Highway 79 all the way to Hughes, and I'm confident most of you in this room know Highway 79 between Marianna and Hughes. And I followed Dicamba for 15 miles, and I quit looking when I ran into Hughes. I said, what's the point? Now, folks, I'll tell you this. I mean, it dissipated as it went across here, and yes, it was on certain side of the trees, but it came across here. It came across soybeans. In 2015, I was called and was asked to come look at this field. This is in northeast Arkansas. I was called and asked to come look at that field. That field right there, I was called by an individual named Mike Wallace that called me to come look at that field. And Mike and I walked that field, and Mike and I went and looked, and we looked half a mile from where Extend Cotton was sprayed illegally in 2015. Half a mile, Mike Wallace had cupped up soybeans. In 2015, I had an opportunity to go down here at the Lake Port Plantation in South Arkansas. And it was an illegal application of dicamba on cotton. I went to the Greenville High School over here, 8.2 miles away, and I could still find cupped up soybeans 8.2 miles from where that application occurred in Arkansas. You could just follow it just straight as you wanted to towards Greenville, Mississippi. This past year, the EPA, Tom Barber, myself, Susie, we went and we looked over here at Reelfoot Lake. This is Dr. Larry Steckel sent me this photograph. Half a mile across a Liberty Link soybean field, dicamba moved. And here's what Dr. Steckel said. He said, the general public will not be happy if dicamba always hits trees, gardens, and parks. But that's where we've been. We went from there and we went into the Boonville, Missouri. This is actually breeding plots at the University of Missouri. And Reuben Barris with the EPA. Folks, no dicamba was sprayed on this farm. This is coming from farms around in the vicinity that sprayed. These are non-dicamba soybeans. I'll let you take a guess what's here. These are soybean breeding plots. That's a close-up. I will tell you today, whether it's the Boonville, Missouri, West Tennessee, or Arkansas, when atmospheric loading of a volatile herbicide occurs, which did occur here, a 1 mile buffer to sensitive crops, and I don't care whether it's soybeans, I'll say sensitive crops, it's not likely it's going to be sufficient when you have atmospheric loading. Here's some data that we collected this year with air samplers, looking at dicamba nanograms per liter. We looked at May 7th, May 21st, June the 11th, and June the 18th. And I want everyone to just take a look how those curves, as I move further and further along, this is dicamba coming off of these plots. Oh, by the way, 96 hours after application, we still have dicamba coming off of these plots. Someone may say, well, it flattens out here. The reason it flattens out there is we had a rainfall event. The reason it flattens out there, we had a rainfall event. Otherwise, this thing would still be coming off. 96 hours after spraying.
Back up.
Yes.
All the difference in dates.
So this, and I'll tell you, this was Fayetteville, which is going to be is a little bit different. The
You got
difference.
a lot less than May 7th than you did.
So this is May, absolutely. This is May 7th, and this is June the 18th. So your question is what?
What's the difference? Why are you getting a lot
The
less?
difference, I think the difference, I think a couple of things is, I think it's warming up, as we move across this, we've had a chance to get, I just put this together yesterday. I think it makes sense, May 7th versus June 18th, that you would be warmer here. The other thing is, I know when we started off with this, we started off spraying bare ground in some of these initial tests, and then we eventually planted soybeans into this field, and we started making applications on V1 soybeans. We made an application right here on a V3 soybean, and we have data. We know for a fact, Brian Young actually has conducted research. When you start spraying soybean, and I presented data to the board here on cotton, when you spray a crop, the volatility of dicamba increases, and it increases substantially. Okay, so I think it's a combination of factors that are contributing to this. Presence of the crop as well as potentially environmental conditions.
Jason,
Yes.
can you go back on that one still? And I can't do this, and maybe you can. Can you correlate nanograms per liter to the 200th rate?
I can't, that's a volume of air is what that is. And one thing I will state is that, we do all this work, we'll go out and we'll make a physical application at a 1/200th, 1/1000th. You saw 1/15,000th even, we'll spray that. And basically what we're doing in that research is we're trying to understand really how sensitive that crop is. But in terms of taking that versus a concentration in air, here's my response to that. I can say, I think with a high degree of confidence, that the concentration in air, soybean is more sensitive, and I say anything, is more sensitive to the concentration in air than what they are to as actual physical application. And part of the reason is, with a physical application, you have a dry physical particle, you got a molecule, a dicamba molecule that is dry and is crystalline, that's lying on that leaf surface that now has to be tried to be taken up. And we know that you may only get 30, 40, 50% of that herbicide into that plant. Actually, the data says you get about 50% of that herbicide into a plant. When you've got a gas, if I have a gas and that gas comes in contact with that plant and those stomates, all of that gas is being taken up. And actually similar to, I'm glad I appreciate you doing that, because saying that, here's something else that we've been able to do and show. We can take plants and we can expose plants to gaseous dicamba out in these fields. We can take those plants and we can bring them into a greenhouse and we can sit them down. They never came in contact with anything but gaseous dicamba. That dicamba is coming into that plant. We can sit that plant down in the greenhouse and we can put soybeans all around that plant, and we can come back 14 days later and all of those soybeans around that plant are cupped up. Not only have I done that, I've spoken to colleagues, University of Missouri, Kevin Bradley tells me he sees the same. When you bring materials and you sit them there, so what it tells me is we're taking in the gas, but also you're having the release of gas. It's being brought in as an active form, and actually even being released as an active form. Is some of it being broken down? Absolutely, I'd expect some of it is being broken down in the plant. But the problem you get into is a sensitivity issue, and I think the sensitivity from a gaseous standpoint is completely different than what we're seeing in here. It's highly, highly sensitive to physical drift, which is what we're simulating in these tank contamination, these low dose problems that we're putting out in the field. One thing I will say, and I come back and folks say, well, you didn't detect enough dicamba there to cause symptoms. My response to that is, I've taken plants, I bring plants, I place them in the field, those plants exhibit symptoms, okay? So why can you say that concentration here isn't sufficient? Because every time I do this research, whether it be in a grower field or whether it be in a 1 acre block or wherever it is, we see symptoms. So my point here is, these concentrations are sufficient, at least from a soybean. Now, I'm not saying anything else, but from a soybean standpoint, we know these concentrations. I had soybeans, actually, I brought soybeans at 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. I placed soybeans in the field here. And guess what I saw? I saw dicamba symptoms on those soybeans. Now I'm just going to talk some about some temperatures. This is a trial that I did in Farmington. I've got a little farm in Farmington outside of Fayetteville. And this is a trial I did in 2017. And we went out and made an application of Clarity and Extendamax, old formulation, new formulation of Dicamba. And I sprayed it, and during half an hour after application, I placed soybeans out in the field. We did this at 24 hours. We did this at 48 hours. And I see some symptoms here. What the point here that I want to make, we were unable to differentiate these plants. Unable to differentiate these plants. 82.6 degrees Fahrenheit was the maximum temperature, and we still were seeing 20% damage. No difference between formulations. We actually did get a slight difference here at 24 to 48. Now I want to show you some data from Dr. Franklin Egan when he was conducting his PhD research at Penn State. He went in and he's looking at temperatures, and I've converted these over to Fahrenheit. You have them in Celsius. And he's measuring the distance to the furthest injured soybean plant, and this was DGA Dicamba. It'd be somewhat similar to Extendamax. It's actually Clarity. And he's looking at how far he causes damage as a function of temperature. And I just took this data, and I just quickly took a pen and I drew a line to fit. This is what we call an exponential increase. And I want everyone to look here about 80 degrees. What do you see? You're coming along here and the stuff's not moving, or at least it's not moving out further and causing any problem until about 80 degrees. And all of a sudden we have this rapid uptick in damage or distance moved. So with that, I conclude distance moves a function of air temperature for Dicamba, and that's really an issue when we start getting about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. This is some data from Dr. Tom Mueller that was published in 2013. This is Dicamba data. And here he's not reporting this as micrograms per liter or nanograms per liter. He's just, this is the amount of Dicamba that he trapped. He went out and made a Dicamba application in the morning. He made a Dicamba application at noon. He made a Dicamba application in the evening. And then he took 6-hour segments and he averaged those and he fit a line to the data that he had generated. And what he saw is right here around 79, 80 degrees, we start this rapid uptick in the accumulation of Dicamba. Is it volatilizing here? Yes, volatilizing here. But look to the extent that it's increasing volatility once we get around 80 degrees. Now I want to bring you back to your data. This is 2017 and 2018. These are the complaints. And this is a slide set that a graph that I took and produced a few weeks ago where I normalized the 2017 and the 2018 data. And I want you to look at that. Because folks say, well, you know, there was 1,000 complaints one year, 200 complaints the other. When you normalize these complaints, I noticed that the trend, we have an exponential increase right here. And then it's more exponential increase, and it's more sigmoidal. But the point here is 2017 and 2018, these curves, these trends, folks, they're identical. 17 and 18, we saw the same result in terms of the percentage of the overall complaints in the state of Arkansas. Now, if you have a mid-June cutoff, the complaints that you would have had in 2017 and 18, let's just say everyone abided by that, we would have had about 65, 67% of the overall complaints in the state would have still occurred if we had just a June 15th cutoff, just a blanket June 15th. 65, 67% of the complaints would have occurred. But I want to look at some of the weather data.